Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those of us joining from other time zones. My name is Gino Fransman, and I am exceptionally happy and proud to be saying hello and welcome to our final session of the Influencing with Open Education webinar series here at Nelson Mandela University. Today is quite an auspicious day for us, being the final of a series of webinars that we've put together in order to help infuse open education, open praxis, open pedagogy, and of course, open textbooks into our curriculum and minds here at the university. Before we go ahead, let me just share some of the room guidelines so that we have an efficient, effective, and informative engagement with someone who is really an icon in education globally. So please note the session is recorded. Have your mics on mute, please. Your camera should be off except when asking questions, and those will be engaged with at the end of the presentation. Please reduce your background noise so that you don't get distracted or distract others. The chat window is there so that you can enter questions as the presentation goes along. That helps us to really go down a list of questions towards the end so that our wonderful speaker for the day and ourselves can help to engage with those. The presentation is about 40 minutes in length, and any follow-up questions you may have, if you have any more at the end of the session, please share them with myself, with Kelly Liberty, with Lungisi Mhlongo, who is the two open education influencers here at Nelson Mandela University, or Selwyn Mulbrow. Those details are being added into the chat window. Now, done. Okay, so recordings of all the sessions will be made available on the Nelson Mandela University webinars and events page, and that link is there under the LT Collab section. We also have an OpenEdInfluencers YouTube channel that has all of our previous sessions and this one soon loaded. Please engage with them, share them, post them, use them. What are we doing today? Well, the Influencing with Open Education is an online webinar series presented by the Open Education Influencers in the LT Collab here at Nelson Mandela University. It's an informative and often practical series of weekly Zoom sessions, which provides attendees opportunities to gain more in-depth understanding of open education, open educational resources, or OER, and open practices. Hear directly from open practitioners in South Africa and today abroad. So seeking to support improved access to education and the resources required for learning and teaching, and aiming to enhance the effectiveness of learning and teaching interventions. The series of webinars also directly engage with the hows of finding open textbooks and other OER in specific disciplines, while exploring open licenses and their reduced barriers to sharing and to using content. Before we begin, please consider completing a very brief survey for another collaboration I'm involved in, along with members of the Open Community and the Global Open Education Resources Graduate Network, or GoGN. You may remember them from having had a session before with Dr. Robert Farrow. We are creating a picture storybook that aims to share open education with younger people in schools, and more importantly, or as importantly, with their parents. You can participate and help us to craft the actual story and even be listed in the contributors list. Find it here. And once again, into the chat window, I've posted that link. So back to the business of the day. The topic for this session is why OER for blockchain and why blockchain for OER. So let me give you an introduction to Professor Rory McGreal. Professor Rory McGreal is the UNESCO International Council for Open and Distance Education Chair in Open Education Resources. He's also the director of the Technology Enhanced Knowledge Research Institute at Athabasca University, which is in Canada. It's 8 a.m. there in the morning right now. It's snowing, it's cold, and we're just grateful that he's joining us. Prof. McGreal is also the co-editor of IRODL, which is the International Review of Research in Open and Distributed Learning. These are all tongue twisters, let me tell you. He's the founder of the OER Knowledge Cloud, which is a repository of research articles on OER. His previous positions include Associate Vice President of Research, the Executive Director of Teleeducation, a Canadian province-wide e-learning network, and supervisor at Contact North in Ontario. He's also the recipient of several national and international awards for open and distance learning. He's also an icon in my books and so many others who hang on his every word. So without much more, I'd like to introduce you to Professor Rory McGreal. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the kind introduction. And good to see you again, and hello to everyone in South Africa. And it's a pleasure for me to be here. And I'm going to talk to you today about a relatively new technology of blockchain, and why blockchain needs open educational resources, and why OER needs blockchain. So I'm going to get my slides up now, and I'll begin. And before I start, thank you once again to all of you for participating and for this kind invitation to speak to you today. So I'm going to start off with letting you know that all the slides are licensed under Creative Commons and attribution, and that some of the images are under fair dealing or fair use for educational purposes and research purposes. So I'll start off by explaining a little bit about what blockchain is. And basically it is a distributed ledger, and it provides information that is recorded and shared. So the idea is that employers, institutions, students can access the blockchain, teachers, and take information and accredit it, validate it, test it, and make use of it. And probably the most well-known example of blockchain is Bitcoin and possibly Ethereum. And again, this is a distributed ledger, and it's a ledger of a specific kind. That is, it's a ledger for monetary uses. But blockchain does not have to be used for monetary reasons. It can be used for other different types of uses. And of course, one of them would be in education, or there's a number of different uses in education. It can be public or private. So a public blockchain is available to everybody, and anyone in the world can access it. Or it can be private, which means it's institutionally controlled, and the only access is people who are associated with a specific institution. So blockchain, some of the features are here. It's number one, a distributed ledger. It's not controlled by anybody. It's shared in a person-to-person network, and it's accessible from any node on the network. So what's a ledger? Well, the first ledgers looked like this, and basically an accounting system or a means of recording activities. Now, a distributed lecture is like this, is that at every single node, the information is stored. So it's not in one specific location. The information is stored on different computers on the internet all around the world. And this facilitates two or more people in collaborating among themselves. And one of the key features of the blockchain is that there is no centralized authority. The records they're validated in blocks. Each new block contains a hash of the previous block, creating a chain. So this hash, which is a alphanumeric operator, it helps to link one block to another block. And this chain can go on and on and on. And if a key aspect of it is that if you cannot alter earlier blocks because it alters the hash and breaks the chain. So if somebody tries to change a previous version, and rather than creating a new version, the chain is broken. So what it does is it makes it impossible to falsify the records. And if you look below, I've just put on an example of what a hash looks like. And so it is so long that it's impossible or almost impossible, except with a supercomputer, can you break the code. So clearly, what happens on the blockchain stays on the blockchain. It is there forever. Records cannot be deleted or changed. Transactions can be easily traced. Anything that happens with them, you can find out what the change was. They're time stamped. That is, the time of the change is right on there. And there's no need for a third party to corroborate the evidence. It's there, it cannot be altered. So it can be used for secure private networks, decentralized exchanges can be made. It can verify a person's identity. It can be used for secure certification. And in our case, in an educational context, it could be credits or micro-credentials or diplomas, etc. It can enhance the performance of the information. And that by that, I mean the computer performance, the speed in which things are done. And it's scalable. It can be it can be used for huge, massive amounts of information. So how does it work? Well, here's an example from the Bitcoin. So Alice wants to send money to Ben. A block is created online, and this represents the first transaction. The block is broadcast to every party in the network. So it goes out and it's distributed right around the network. Ben receives the money from Alice. The block is then added to the claim, which provides a permanent, non-repudiable, and transparent record of the transaction. and then those in the network approve the transaction and validate it. So that's the basic architecture of how a blockchain works. The aspects are there. It's decentralized, it's distributed, it's immutable, it's secure, and it's time-stamped. Well, as you might surmise, nothing is perfect, and there are some problems with blockchain. As with any big system, there can be unexpected failures. Some people refer to them as black swans, like we have the coronavirus. Suddenly everything's working great, and something like the coronavirus comes in and disrupts everything. Well, this is the same in computer networks. Is something that nobody has foreseen can come in and create a huge failure on a large system. And the larger the system, the bigger the possibility of failure. Another problem is this, why would we want to change a system that works? So if you change a system that works, quite often you're asking for problems. And one that a quite serious problem, is that encryption is permanent. The keys can be forgotten. So what happens is once you encrypt and take your password, you can forget it. And if you forget the password, and the passwords, as you saw with the hash, they're very, very long, complicated lists of numbers and letters, and it's permanent. So if you lose that, you lose whatever access you have to the data that you have encrypted. And in the Bitcoin scenario, you lose your money, you lose your Bitcoins. Another problem is the persistence. So persistence, we say, is a virtue, that everything stays there. But hold on a minute, what if it's fake content? If it's fake content, it stays on forever. What if it's illegal content? What if it's unwanted content, content that you've placed on there, but you no longer want it to be on there? And there could be somebody leaks personal data about you or somebody else, and you or somebody else cannot change that. It's on there forever. So these are very serious problems with the blockchain. In addition, there are network maintenance costs. Somebody has to pay to keep the network going. Hacking, although they say it's impossible to hack, it can still, there is that risk of being hacked. Transaction speeds, because of distributed verification, can be a little too slow for some people's liking. It can take, instead of being done instantly, it can take multi-seconds. There could be regulatory intervention, and this is a particular fear when we're talking about blockchain and Bitcoin or Ethereum, where the financial institutions are regulated by the government. But it could also be in any other type of blockchain. And to date, there's a dearth of useful applications. So there aren't many useful applications up to the present time. And a major problem that people do point out is the problem of energy use. Now, there's different types of blockchains, and they're mentioned here. POW, proof of work. POS, proof of stake. Proof of authority, and proof of identity. And different types use different amounts of energy. And this graph shows, for example, data on a simple server that is not a blockchain, it isn't on a blockchain, uses very little energy. If it's in a centralized system, for example, like Amazon workspace, it uses a little bit more energy. But if we look at Bitcoin and public blockchains, right at the right end of the graph, you'll see huge amounts of energy. And note that the scale here is an exponential scale. It goes doubles every time, double, 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 all the way up. This is a huge amount of energy. They say they say that Bitcoin at the present time uses more energy than the entire country of Ireland. So it is a huge amount and a big problem. And other types of blockchains, the public blockchain, again, still uses an immense amount of energy. And but the one I'll be talking to you today for education is the one in red, the enterprise blockchain, which does use more energy than simple systems. But we believe that blockchain has certain positive attributes that make it worthwhile to continue down this road. Now I'm going to talk about open educational resources and their relationship to blockchain. And I'm going to assume, because you are influencers generally here, that you know a bit about open educational resources. So I'm just going to more or less summarize this. I'm not going to read out the definition, and I'm going to just summarize what we're talking about. And as you know, OER are not just textbooks, free textbooks. They could be games, they could be video, they could be audio, podcasts, curriculum, a wide range. The key point is that they are all openly licensed using Creative Commons license. And I won't explain this today. I'm going to assume that there is a certain amount of knowledge among the listeners. They can be used, OER are great for sharing, republishing. Multiple channels can be opened in different networks using them. You can have multiple versions of the same concept. So if you can have all of these attributes, multiple channels, republishing, sharing, multiple channels, multiple versions, etc., why is our OER good for blockchain? Well, it empowers scalability. If there's no licensing restrictions, you can do what you want with them, including scale them, that is, republish them to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. And in that way, you can make a blockchain accessible to people everywhere. And more specifically, it overcomes the problem, one of the primary problems of commercial content. That is DRM, or digital rights management, which is a technical lock that commercial publishers place on their material. And the last one, digital licenses, are the legal restrictions that stop you from sharing, making scalable, making accessible commercial content. The publishers call it digital rights management. I think a more exact word would be digital restrictions management. That is, it manages all kinds of restrictions that they place on the use of their commercial content. So if we're talking about scalable solutions, this is only possible with open data or OER, open access, open software, etc. Because the commercial content is restricted and you need to get permissions, it's very difficult to scale it up for use. There are international differences in copyright. Every country has its own copyright regulations, and licensing from commercial publishers becomes very problematic when you're using content among different countries. And there are an exponential list of problems with licensing. For example, if you have an agreement between University X and University Y, there might be 4 problems. And if you add another university, that doesn't make 5 or 6 problems. It means 4 times 4, 16 problems. You add a 4th university, and you're talking about 16 times 16 problems, and so on. So it becomes impossible when you're working with licenses among different institutions. OER for blockchain. So the benefits of blockchain are best achieved through open implementations. The open source industry has started using blockchains, and they do it by adopting industry standards. Some of them are written there. They have blockchain protocols, and there are industry blockchains, for example, for insurance policies, proof of origin, etc. So the open source industry has begun with them, and we are hoping we can follow suit as OER did. OER followed the open software initiatives in the 1990s, and we hope we can follow with OER for blockchain. So it provides access and affordability. Content needs to be inexpensive when it is needed by the learner. And the problem with commercial content is that it's not our property. So the digital rights management, the digital locks, that restricts our freedom of how we use the content. The publishers own and control their content. We don't. And that's a major problem when we're talking about using commercial content rather than open education resources when we are putting our blockchains together. DRM is defective by design. That is, they take a perfectly good content and they add a lock to it which creates a defect in the system. When the book is locked by DRM, you can't do much with it. Even if you have a legal right using fair dealing or fair use for education, you still cannot access the information. And this has been used in the past for nefarious purposes. They have actually invaded people's computers and taken off content and books, etc., books and videos that belong to people, or that what people thought belonged to them. They thought they owned it, but in fact they didn't, because the digital licensing and the digital locks prevented that. So digital rights management is toxic. It needs deep permissions into the operating system. That is, it could be very detrimental to your operating system, and it can stop normal operating system functions. It is defective by design. These digital locks are imported defects into your device. With digital rights management, with these digital locks, you can't, for example, copy and paste, annotate, highlight. You can't use text to speech. Again, which is a major problem. You can't use the text to speech software. This is a major problem for people with visual difficulties. You can't change the format. You can't even move your content from one computer to another. You can't print it out. You can't even move it geographically. If you take your commercial content from North America to Africa, it won't work in Africa. It'll only work while you're in North America. You can't use it after an expiry date. So what they do on commercial textbooks is they have a kill date, where 1 month after the final exam of your course, they invade your computer and take out their content. And of course, unlike a printed textbook, you can't resell it and get some of your money back. So digital rights management is very highly restrictive. And I'm sure some of you, or most of you, have seen this quite often, that you can't see the video in your country. We see it quite often in Canada. And some of you may have heard of Error 53. I hope not, but because if you have, basically what it does is it turns your iPhone into a brick. And what it is that if you have your iPhone fixed by an unauthorized dealer, the next time you upgrade the operating system, it disables all of the features in your iPhone. It's no longer usable. And this happened a few years ago, and to a number of people. I must say that Apple has seen the error of its ways, and they no longer do this, but there's nothing to prevent them from doing it again in some other fashion. So who's really losing? Any obstacle that makes a record harder to listen to is bad news for the artist that made it. So for the owners of the content, it's bad news if people have difficulty making use of the content for the authors, but publishers do this to protect their profits. So I'll look at blockchain from another direction, and OER is I was just explaining to you why I believe that OER are important for blockchain. And now how our OER, just a minute here, how OER or why blockchain is important for open educational resources. Well, here are some of the faculty concerns about open education resources. They're worried that they're not being properly attributed. They want to be known by the world that they created the content being used. Sometimes people disregard the open content requirements. This is especially true when people use the restriction of non-commercial, and when some commercial companies make use of their content, or no distribution, the restriction of no distribution, no derivatives, excuse me, people start changing it without the permission of the author. So there are other ways of misusing the published work. They're worried about the sustainability of the OER, that it may suddenly no longer be available. And the inability or unwillingness to pay predatory publishers. So they're very worried, and this is a big problem with open access with scholarly articles. A number of the major publishers will release your article as an open access article, but the author has to pay them for the privilege. So these are some of the concerns about OER as expressed by faculty. Other ones are that records can be secured and permanent. So they want to ensure that their records are secured and permanent because institutions can disappear. So if you have your content on one server at one institution, that institution could disappear, or that institution could simply erase your content without letting you know about that. So this is a concern. And with blockchain, when it's distributed among millions or thousands or hundreds of thousands of servers around the world, this is not possible. Excuse me. There are OER networks for scholars, and this allows scholars to share together, and many like this. The records are almost incorruptible, and changes can be tracked. So if somebody takes your lesson, your content, and makes changes, we can know exactly when and how that happened. And so with that, there's less resistance by faculty to remixing or mashups, because they know that their original content in its original form is available for people to see. Now, again, the problems for OER with blockchain are there, as I mentioned earlier, with blockchain, there are higher operational costs. It does address the problem of insufficient copyright protection. Blockchain is a great protector of your copyright. And if you have a Creative Commons license on it, you still own the copyright. It can overcome barriers to sharing resources, and it can also, there are problems with if the content is not of high quality, it cannot be used. So some of the blockchain solutions to OER problems: tracking and tracing. That is, whatever happens to it, you can track it no matter where it's used anywhere in the world. One of the problems nowadays is you put your OER out there, people take it and use it, and you don't know where it's gone or what's happening to it. You can't trace the paths it got to the other place. Now with blockchain, you can do that. It ensures proper attribution. You will always be attributed using blockchain. It's sustainable because it's distributed. It is not dependent on one single node. It can stay there. The publishing time, it can be drastically shortened because of blockchain. You can get it out there to more people in multiple different ways using blockchain. And there is no single point of failure. So if it fails in one location, it's available in thousands of other locations. So it cannot be a failure, like in that sense. Some of the advantages for your open educational resources: self-sovereignty. You control your product. Trust. You can trust that it will be only used in the ways that you want it to be used. Provenance. It proves where it comes from, and every time that a change is made, it has proof of that. And this is transparent. That is, anyone can see this chain. It's immutable. You cannot change the blocks in the chain. You can only add a block to the chain. You cannot actually change anything. Disintermediation. That is, that you don't need a mediator. You do not need any authority to control your blockchain or access to your blockchain. And it supports collaboration among different faculty, different students, etc., who are using open educational resources. So blockchain addresses three main problems of OER. One of them is that your OER are hidden from view or inaccessible. And I believe this is a major problem for open educational resources. There are now, I would estimate, tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of quality open educational resources that are just not known and that people cannot easily find them. They're not on the main repositories, and they're made available to people, but people don't know how to access them. These OER also lack permanence. That is, we don't know how long they're going to stay there. It's sort of here today, gone tomorrow. And so that's a huge problem for OER. And not too often, I hope. Excuse me. Not too often, I hope, is that your Creative Commons intellectual property is not recognized. And that is that people, you put on a no derivatives, or you put on a non-commercial license, or you put on share alike, and people ignore it. Well, with blockchain, this can be very easily traced, and you can find out who's doing that and stop it. So this eliminates the need for centralized repositories. There's been quite a few different attempts at OER repositories, and this makes it so as you do not need to have a centralized repository. And in this way, plagiarism becomes obsolete because you can easily find the blockchain, the content in the blockchain, and know exactly where it came from. And it makes it very difficult, if not impossible, to plagiarize. And if I could just expand on that a little bit, that means that if you change somebody's content and pretend that it's yours, the blockchain has a record of this. So it becomes impossible for people to use your open educational resource and pretend that it belongs to them, that they created it. So OER records are secured and permanent in a blockchain. It shows the publication date, the location, and the authorship. So all three are there permanently in the blockchain. Any change or transaction gets a new hash value and becomes a new blockchain that's tied in with the hash to the previous blockchain. Any change requires consensus. That is, every node must accept it. And again, to repeat, the author is always attributed. So the OER files will always include this attribution. This makes there's less resistance to remixing OER. So some people, to give an example, a professor creates a lesson, a really good lesson. Somebody else changes it and alters it. And the original author thinks, well, that's not an improvement on my lesson. It makes it worse. There will always be a record of the original one, so people will not think that the author has made the new, even though his name is on there, the name of the person who changed it is now on there, and they will have to take responsibility for it. So the records are permanent regardless of the changes. The OER publishing networks can be created by scholars, and the OER records will be almost incorruptible as just about anything. So the process works like this. An OER is created, it's adopted, and then it's shared. And once it's adopted, people can find it, they can evaluate it, they can edit it, and then they can adopt it. So it's a circle. They can create a new OER, or they can build on it and make it into a one that is new. For example, they may translate it into another language if the license allows for that, and continue the blockchain. So this solves the centralization issue. A big issue with OER is, oh, where can I find this stuff? I need an OER on nursing health, and where can I find it? It's distributed on the network, makes it much easier to find. It becomes a network of trusted entities with gatekeeping nodes. Access to the content is there with a public key, and verification and the validation of the OER can be based on the quality of the OER. The blockchain activates a decoding mechanism. That is and this is a criteria for Creative Commons. You can upload a new version and maintain the trackability. It's posted on the ledger. And when it's CC BY with no derivatives or non-commercial, then it cannot be changed without permission. So it's not even possible to change it. You can put that restriction on it. So it's good for OER quality. It's good for maintaining the copyright rights of the author. No need for centralization. It can significantly reduce time to publication, and it increases the availability of the OER. The OER can be on a distributed management platform. So this means that the user can manage his or her own resources. They can create the resources, manage them, manage the copyright. If there's a currency exchange, there's a virtual currency exchange is possible, and learning certification management is possible. And when I say that, one of the probably first major educational uses for blockchain will be in certification management. And certification has had a symbiotic relationship with open educational resources. And OER have been the main impetus and the stimulator for things like badges, micro-credentials, credit transfer, and open standards. So blockchain plus badges equals rocket fuel for verified trusted credentials. I mean, it is a huge boost to verifying and trusting credentials. And it takes away credential management from institution. Present systems are cumbersome and inefficient. Generally, they have to print out your certificate. There's an inability to provide a certificate is serious. That is, people need their certificates of accreditation, and they have to send away all the time to the university. So digital systems can help in certification. Planko, he believes that blockchain is the death knell for the embossed transcript. So having your nice wall on the wall embossed certificate, he believes is no longer going to be that important, even dead, with the introduction of blockchain certification. So if we're talking about certification by blockchain, you have the employer who verifies your knowledge, shares it on the blockchain, and the recipient can then, the student, can send a public key to the issuer and a hash certificate onto the blockchain, where he requests that you send his certification to an employer. And the employer gets it. The employer knows that it's a valid certificate on the blockchain because it cannot be changed. And if there is a change, he can trace the change to see what happened. And so it's a very efficient way of certifying. And a key point is that it's under the control of the student rather than the institution. So you create, with certification, you create a wallet for academic credentials, sort of like Bitcoin. Instead of money, it's your credentials. You can pre-create and share your keys, and you can destroy them if you want. And actually, this is a major issue, is some people who may not want, for whatever reason, to have a particular certification on record, it may be difficult for them to destroy it. So we're looking into this as a problem of certification. It certainly requires a higher level of trust in an institution. The certificate is only useful when tied to a person, and the privacy of the data is essential. It must be kept private. Only the person controlling the wallet should have access to it, unless he or she provides access to a particular certificate to a particular employer or institution. So, should learners be able to choose what history they share with others? That is, it's totally up to the person what they want to share. They can have different narratives for different purposes. Can they highlight or hide different experiences? So, for example, if they want to have a job in a hospital, they may want to have all their health-related certificates put forward, but they may not want another type of certificate put forward that won't increase their chances for a position. And it allows for prior learning assessment and recognition. Now, the European Union have stated that blockchain will end paper-based certificates. It will automate the award, recognition, and transfer of credits and increase learner ownership and control over their own data. It will reduce the institutional data costs and risk, but only if open standards are adopted. So this is a key point that the European Union recognizes the need for OER, open access, open source. Only if open standards are adopted will blockchain make a difference in Europe. Blockchain can be disrupting and democratizing education. It can be used for, rather than the university, awarding qualifications, licensing and accreditation, the management of student records, intellectual property management and payments, and a permanent distributed record of institutional output and reputation. So the ownership and control, it belongs to the individual, not the institution. Your information is preserved, it's kept valid, and it's reliably valid. And one company that is leading in this is called Blockstack, and they've created a domain name system that's based on blockchain. It's a decentralized computing platform. The users are in control of their data and identity, and data breaches and trust violations are not possible. So this is one company that's taking the lead on that, Blockstack. And they have the proof of transfer protocol, which is a key tool in fully realizing a user-owned internet in a secure way. So some of the problems for higher education institutions: can they disintermediate inefficient, opaque, and hierarchically centralized systems? And the way it's done now, there's going to be, with blockchain, of course, a major change. Higher education institutions need not be involved in the verification of certificates. Informal learning can be verified like formal education. So now there's different forms of verification of skills and knowledge. The monopoly no longer will belong to the institutions. But some of the problems for learners: What happens if a student wants or needs a fresh start? And Waters put it this way: gains afforded by the immutability of the data are undermined by problems which are left unresolvable because of that same immutability. So immutability creates solutions and it creates problems. And it's a big one to be resolved by the learner. So blockchain plus OER gives freedom for learners. It's freedom to enroll and complete courses at institutions of a learner's choice, to change institutions as they strive to complete a program. So you don't have to take a full program at one institution. You can take your credentials for each course, micro credit or full credit, and use it with different institutions. You can transfer credit among institutions nationally and internationally. And you can have your prior learning assessed and accredited at different institutions. And I'd just like to put a plug in here for Malta, which has become a blockchain island. And it's the first world jurisdiction to provide legal certainty in this space. So they've changed their laws to ensure that blockchain is implemented, and they have some of the world's most important blockchain initiatives in Malta. Highland is the partner with Malta, an American company, and they're looking at the entire value chain, creation of content, issuing of certificates, viewing, verification, etc. And to date, over 2,000 certificates have been provided using blockchain. So I'll finish up now with this statement that everything you know is wrong, and that every day computers are making people easier to use. So Professor Whitesize tells us affordability in the future may be the first requirement, not an afterthought. The race may not be to the swift, but to the cheap. And blockchain is a way of making all of these things possible, but only when we're talking about using open educational resources. So thank you for your attention, and I'll leave it open now for questions.
Can I just say, wow, as someone who hasn't known all that much about blockchain, this has been quite the illuminating engagement. Thank you, Prof. McGreal. And I'd like to, hi, it's good to see you. I'd like to actually hand over to Kelly and Mlungisi. Mlungisi, do you want to put your camera on, perhaps? These are two of our open education influencers here at Mandela Uni, and they will facilitate the question session. Guys, you are muted. I'll just mute myself and we just keep our cameras on, okay?
I see we have a question from Gino Fransman. The question reads, is the ability there to regain access if a password is lost, or would it be gone without a mechanism to get it back?
Well, with the blockchain, it's always there. It cannot be lost. It's always there. It's distributed among thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of different locations and on the internet. And so it's always available. And this is again what I was saying about immutability, is that's a good thing. It can't be lost, but then it could be a bad thing. If you may want it to be lost, you may not want to keep it, and it's there. So yeah, blockchain is one of the safest ways of ensuring the sustainability of your creation.
Did that answer the question, Gino?
Sorry, is there another question?
Okay, we have another question here from Dr. Tony. It says, are there any gatekeeping mechanisms to avoid distribution of fake or illegal material? I think you also touched on that. Maybe we can have a comment.
The gatekeeping mechanism would be is if your university creates an open educational resource, that they validate it before it's put into the blockchain. And once it's on there, if somebody changes it, you have a record of that change. And so if they try to fake it or anything, you know who faked it, when, and exactly what time that happened, and you can take action against them. So it's much more, the gatekeeping is much more robust with blockchain than just about any other way today. You will know when it's being used and how and what changes are made. However, let me just comment a bit more on that, is that if somebody creates fake material, that stays there forever as well. And the problem with that is if you create fake material, your name is forever matched to that fake material. And it's almost impossible, if not impossible, for you to change that. So it's a big impetus to make sure that when you put something out there on blockchain, it had better be verifiable and true, and that you're proud of it, because if you're not proud of it, it may come back to haunt you. And these little things like that generally don't come back to haunt most people. That is until you become famous. If or you have a number of enemies. If you get a few enemies, then you can have big problems if you have fake material, if you have put fake material out there.
Okay, thanks so much, Prof. I think we have one more question from Matilda Smith.
Yeah, before, I'd just like to add, though, that that's only if you're not President of the United States. He can put all the fake stuff out he wants and nobody is too bothered about it. But if you're not the President of the United States, you could be in big trouble.
Yeah. So one last question. She's asking, it appears as though blockchain can be very attractive for creators of knowledge and converting to open. Does blockchain then not threaten institutions whose income depends upon knowledge being owned by themselves as opposed to the creator?
Oh, yes. It's a threat to institutions. I hope I made that clear, that disintermediation. I mean, what are insurance, what are institutions selling? And basically it's the certificate, the diploma. And they're being disintermediated from that. That is, you could learn something on your own or learn something at that university and get it certified by another institution. And they lose the revenue stream that comes from that. So yes, it could be a threat. And the problem is this, is that institutions have to figure out, shall we go to blockchain first and be a threat to other institutions? Or shall we wait and let other institutions do it first and they'll be a threat to us? So that's the dilemma that institutions will be failing and are beginning to experience now.
That's a beautiful comment there. And thank you so much. I think that is all the questions we have for now. So I'm going to hand over to Gino for closing. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mlungisi. I hope I pronounced it right.
That's correct. Thank you.
You're 95% of the way there. Those are wonderful questions, and thank you to the OEs for facilitating our Q&A section. Selwyn, would you like to join us and have your few words, please?
Yes, thank you, Gino. Gino, on behalf of Mandela Uni's VC, the HOD of our lab, Mr. Dave Jenkins, our OpenEdInfluencers, Mlungisi, Kelly, and myself, thank you for a very successful and memorable OpenEdColloquium 2020. It's been very interesting and thought-provoking. The webinar series during a worldwide pandemic lockdown really pushed us, our boundaries and our limitations, and our abilities. The team knows the long hours and hard work that went into this webinar series. We therefore appreciate the leadership and pioneering role that you have played in making this event a huge success. We appreciate you and thank you again for what you are doing for open education in supporting learning and teaching at this institution and around the world. And before I log off and give over to you, I would like our attendees to please follow us on Twitter at our handle OpenInfluencers, or even subscribe and visit our YouTube channel, namely OpenEdInfluencers. Gino, over to you.
Thank you, Selwyn. That was really nice to hear. I appreciate that. And really, my mission in my career is really to share the benefits and the potential of open. So I'm super happy that we've gotten attendance, that we've gotten some traction within the institution, that we've gotten 3 years worth of funding in order to continue opening up. And this is reaching the end of year 1 of that funding cycle. I wrote a few words actually, so thank you all for attending our final session in our series of webinars. It's been an experience both setting up and then executing our mission to share open with the wider community, and it's part of our advocacy efforts aiming to support learning and teaching in many spaces, both here and abroad. Please reach out to us in order to explore more, and especially to get onto the OER adoption track. It's time for us to move away from awareness raising and to get into both adoption as well as creation of our own resources here from the global south as well. Our website link is in the chat window. Kelly and Lungisi are kind enough to post it there. Along with our YouTube link where all the recordings are now loaded. Very special thanks to our speakers. Our speaker for today, Prof. McGreal. This has been an absolutely enlightening engagement, and we are so grateful for your skills, your time, your expertise. Thank you to all of the other speakers in the other 7 sessions in the webinar series, which we've titled #OpenEdColloquium20, but really the series name is Influencing with Open Education. The support colleagues here at Mandela University have been amazing. So thank you, Taryn, for the artworks from graphic design. It's been stunning and your responsiveness has been next level. Thank you, Selwyn, for your support, for your administrative skills, for your social media influencing yourself. Thank you to Dave Jenkins for being a director with direction and who's fully supportive of the open endeavors here at Mandela University. A special shout out goes out to Kelly, Liberty, and Mlungisi, Mhlongo. You guys are next level. I think that when we started this journey as OpenEdInfluencers in training, it was baptism by fire. You've come out on the other side, fully capable, enabled, efficient, competent, and you are now advocates for open education. But more than that, for change. You are change agents worth putting out there for other people to access, to be supported, to be supportive. So next up, we present at Open Education Global next month. So do look out for us. And until then, I guess this is goodbye. And for now, Prof. McGreal, I hope that we can hang out a bit at the end of this, a bit some more. But for everyone else, be safe, be open, and stay well. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Gino.
Bye.
Bye.
You guys are welcome to hang out with us if you want. I'm stopping right now.